Pastor Jacob Mason noticed at the moment his Chevy Silverado crested the hill overlooking Sodom Hills, Maine. The town sprawled below him like a wound in the landscape, weathered houses clinging to rocky cliffs, streets that curved like broken fingers pointing toward the Atlantic. And there, jutting from the northernmost point, the lighthouse stood sentinel against the gray October sky, its light forever extinguished. Something about it made his chest tighten. "You're being ridiculous," he muttered to himself, adjusting his grip on the steering wheel. The leather-bound Bible on his passenger seat slid forward as he descended the winding coastal road. He'd been a pastor for 12 years, served 3 congregations across New England, and he'd never been the superstitious type. Yet here he was, feeling like a character in one of those horror movies his youth group wasn't supposed to watch. The GPS chimed. "You have arrived at your destination." The Sodom Hills Community Church looked exactly like the photos Deacon Richards had emailed him. A modest white building with a crooked steeple, American flag hanging limp in the salt air, and a sign out front that read, "All are welcome. Pastor Jacob Mason." Someone had already added his name. That was efficient. Jacob killed the engine and sat for a moment, studying the building. Paint peeled from the window frames. The parking lot had maybe 6 cars, scattered like dropped coins. It was Wednesday afternoon, so he hadn't expected a crowd, but still. The previous pastor had written that Sunday services drew 60 to 70 people. For a town of maybe 2,000, that wasn't terrible. The previous pastor, Thomas Webb, dead at 43 of a heart attack, found slumped over his desk in the church office. That had been 6 months ago. Since then, the church had been without permanent leadership, kept alive by rotating guest ministers and the sheer stubborn will of Deacon Richards and the church board. Jacob grabbed his Bible and stepped out into the October chill. The wind off the ocean cut through his jacket immediately, carrying with it the smell of salt and something else. Something like rot, maybe, or old fish left too long in the sun. "Pastor Mason." A woman emerged from the church, bundled in a thick cardigan despite the cold doing little to warm her. She was maybe 60, with steel gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that had seen too much. "Margaret Richards. We spoke on the phone." "Mrs. Richards." Jacob shook her hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Good to finally meet you in person. And please, call me Jacob." "Margaret, then." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know you must be exhausted from the drive. We've got the parsonage all set up for you. It's just behind the church. But I thought you might want to see your office first." "That'd be great, actually." She led him inside. The church was cold, not just temperature-wise, but in that way old buildings get when they've been neglected. The sanctuary was small but well-proportioned, with maybe 20 rows of pews leading to a simple altar. Afternoon light struggled through stained glass windows depicting various Bible scenes. Nothing fancy but serviceable. "We've had some difficulties keeping the heating consistent," Margaret said, her voice echoing slightly. "The boiler's older than I am. We're working on fundraising for a replacement." Jacob nodded, making mental notes. He'd dealt with aging infrastructure before. That wasn't what bothered him. What bothered him was the smell, faint but persistent, like something had died in the walls and was taking its sweet time decomposing. Margaret must have seen his expression. "I know. We've had exterminators out 3 times. They can't find anything. It comes and goes." She walked him down a narrow hallway to a small office. Pastor Webb's office. Jacob's office now. The room was sparse. A desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with theological texts and commentaries. Someone had cleaned it out, obviously, but they'd left the books. Jacob recognized several titles from his own seminary days. "Pastor Webb was a scholar," Margaret said quietly. 30 years he served this community. He loved this church. She paused, her hand resting on the door frame. His death was unexpected. The doctors said it was his heart, but Thomas was healthy. Walked 3 miles every morning. Never missed a day. Jacob set his Bible on the desk. "Sometimes these things just happen, Margaret. We can't always." He was terrified. The words hung in the air between them. "I'm sorry," Jacob said carefully. Margaret's eyes fixed on the window, which looked out toward the distant lighthouse. The last few months before he died, Thomas changed. He stopped sleeping, started staying in his office all night, reading, researching. He kept asking questions about the lighthouse, about the town's history. Things that didn't have anything to do with the church. What kind of things? He wanted to know why the lighthouse went dark. Who made the decision? What happened to the keeper? She finally looked at Jacob, and there was something desperate in her expression. I told him to let it go. Some stories are better left buried. But Thomas, he couldn't. And then one morning I found him here, at this desk. She touched the surface, fingers tracing invisible patterns. His face. Jacob, I've seen death before. This was different. He looked like he'd seen something. Something that stopped his heart from pure terror. A chill ran down Jacob's spine that had nothing to do with the cold building. Margaret, I appreciate you being honest with me, but I'm not trying to scare you off, she interrupted. God knows we need you here, but you need to understand what you're walking into. This town, there's something wrong with it. Something old and wrong. And it has to do with that lighthouse. Jacob glanced out the window at the dark tower in the distance. From here, he could see how it dominated the landscape, like a warning or a threat. What happened to the lighthouse keeper? He heard himself ask. Margaret's expression hardened. 17 years ago, Samuel Thorne locked himself in the lighthouse and never came out. Police found his body 3 days later at the top of the tower. They said it was suicide, but she trailed off. His Bible was found with him. Every single page had been torn out and nailed to the walls. Thousands of pages. And on every one of them, he'd written the same thing over and over, as it was written. Jacob didn't sleep well that first night. The parsonage was comfortable enough. A small 2-bedroom cottage with outdated but functional furniture. Margaret had stocked the fridge with essentials, left a welcome basket on the counter with homemade cookies and a note. Welcome to Sodom Hills. We're glad you're here. But comfort didn't erase the story Margaret had told him, or the way she'd looked at the lighthouse when she spoke about Samuel Thorne. He lay in bed, listening to the wind howl outside his window, and tried to pray. The words felt hollow in his mouth, like speaking into a void. That wasn't normal for him. Prayer had always been his anchor, his way of processing the world. But here, in this dark cottage with the sound of the ocean crashing somewhere in the distance, his prayers felt like they stopped at the ceiling. Around 2 a.m., he gave up on sleep and made coffee. The kitchen window faced north, and from it, he could just make out the silhouette of the lighthouse against the star-studded sky. Still dark. Still waiting. As it was written. What did that mean? Jacob was familiar with the phrase. It appeared throughout the Gospels, usually in reference to prophecy being fulfilled. But why would a lighthouse keeper write it thousands of times before killing himself? He pulled out his laptop and started researching. The internet connection was spotty, but he managed to pull up some basic information about Sodom Hills. The town was old, established in 1682 by Puritan settlers fleeing religious persecution in Massachusetts Bay Colony. The lighthouse was built in 1847 and had operated continuously until 17 years ago. The town's name, though, that was interesting. Most of the articles glossed over it, but Jacob found one blog post from a local historian that mentioned the name's origin. The original settlers had believed they were establishing a new Sodom, a place where God's judgment had been rightfully poured out on the wicked. The area had apparently been home to a Native American tribe that practiced what the Puritans considered devil worship. The settlers had systematically eliminated them, believing themselves to be instruments of divine wrath. Jesus, Jacob whispered, feeling sick. He found a grainy photograph from 1847 showing the lighthouse shortly after its completion. A group of men stood at its base, stern-faced and formal in their period clothing. One of them held a Bible. The caption read, Lighthouse Dedication Ceremony. Reverend Josiah Webb presiding. What? Like Pastor Thomas Webb. Like the man who died terrified at his desk. Jacob's phone buzzed, making him jump. A text from an unknown number. Don't trust the deacons. Don't go to the lighthouse. Leave while you still can. A friend. His hands were shaking as he typed back, Who is this? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No response came. Jacob stared at his phone for a long moment, then set it down and walked to the window. The lighthouse seemed closer now, though he knew that was impossible. Just a trick of the darkness, the way things looked different at night. He needed to talk to someone. Someone who understood what he was dealing with. But who? Margaret? She'd already warned him. The deacons? The text said not to trust them. His bishop? And say what? That he was spooked by a dead lighthouse and a possibly superstitious old woman? He'd come here to serve this community, to shepherd this church. He wasn't going to run at the first sign of strangeness. Every town had its dark history, its local legends. That didn't mean there was anything supernatural about it. But even as he thought this, he found himself pulling out his Bible and opening to Jude, verse 7. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. The lighthouse stood dark against the stars, and Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching him back. Sunday morning arrived cold and gray. Jacob woke to find frost on his windows and a text from Margaret, "Looking forward to hearing you preach. Praying for you." He appreciated the sentiment, though he couldn't help but notice she said, "praying for you," instead of "praying with you." The service was at 10 a.m. Jacob arrived at 8:30 to find the church already open, lights on, and Margaret in the kitchen preparing coffee. 3 other people were there, all older, all regarding him with expressions that ranged from hopeful to suspicious. "Pastor Mason," Margaret said, making introductions. "This is Deacon Harold Richmond, Deacon Sarah Chin, and Deacon William Price." Jacob shook hands with each of them. Harold was in his 70s, built like a linebacker, with hands rough from decades of fishing. Sarah was younger, maybe 50, with careful eyes and a warm smile. William was somewhere in between, thin and nervous, constantly adjusting his glasses. "We're so glad you're here," Sarah said. "It's been difficult without a permanent pastor." "I'm glad to be here," Jacob replied, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true anymore. "You've settled in okay?" Harold asked. His voice was gravel and salt water. "Parsonage treating you all right?" "Very comfortable, thank you." "Good, good." Harold exchanged a glance with William that Jacob couldn't quite read. Pastor Webb used to say that Cottage had good bones. Kept him grounded, he said. There was something in the way he said, grounded, that made Jacob's skin prickle. By 9:45, the sanctuary had filled to maybe 40 people. Not the 60 or 70 Margaret had mentioned, but respectable for a dying coastal town. Jacob noticed the congregation skewed older, with only a handful of families with children. Everyone looked tired, like they weren't sleeping well. He'd prepared a sermon on Matthew 5, the Beatitudes, a safe choice for a first Sunday. But standing at the pulpit, looking out at those weary faces, he felt the words he'd written weren't right. They were too polished, too seminary. These people didn't need theological precision. They needed hope. "I know I'm new here," Jacob began, setting his notes aside. "I don't know your stories yet, your struggles, your joys. But I want to. That's why I came to Sodom Hills. Not to be your boss or your judge, but to walk with you. To serve you." He saw Margaret in the 3rd row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." I know this church has been mourning. The loss of Pastor Webb was sudden and painful. But I believe God brought me here for a reason. Not to replace Thomas. No one could do that, but to continue his work. To help this community heal. The sermon lasted 20 minutes. Jacob kept it simple, focused on hope and healing and the promise that God doesn't abandon his people even in their darkest moments. He believed every word he said. But even as he spoke, his eyes kept drifting to the window, to the distant shadow of the lighthouse. And he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, something, was listening. After the service, people filed past to shake his hand. Most were kind, welcoming. A few were reserved, watching him with calculating eyes. One old woman, bent nearly double with age, gripped his hand with surprising strength and whispered, "You have kind eyes, Pastor. But kind eyes won't save you from what's coming." Before Jacob could respond, she shuffled away, leaving him standing there with a chill running down his spine. "Don't mind Esther," Margaret said, appearing at his elbow. "She's been saying cryptic things since before I was born. Some people think she's a bit touched." "What did she mean by, 'what's coming'?" Margaret's smile faltered. That's just Esther being Esther." But Jacob could see she was lying. That afternoon, he decided to explore the town. Sodom Hills was small enough to walk from one end to the other in 30 minutes, though the hills made it feel longer. He passed weathered houses with peeling paint, a general store that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s, a diner called The Catch that smelled like old grease and desperation. Everyone he passed nodded or waved, but no one stopped to chat. There was a wariness in their eyes, like they were waiting for something. The lighthouse drew him like gravity. He told himself he was just curious, just getting to know his new home, but that wasn't entirely true. There was something about that dark tower that demanded investigation, that whispered secrets in a language he didn't quite understand but felt in his bones. The path to the lighthouse was overgrown, clearly unused for years. Jacob picked his way through brambles and wild grass, his jacket catching on thorns. The ocean roared to his left, waves crashing against the rocks 50 feet below. One wrong step would send him tumbling to his death. The lighthouse loomed larger as he approached, and he could see now that it wasn't just neglected, it was deliberately abandoned. The door was chained shut, windows boarded up. Someone had painted a symbol on the door in faded red paint, a cross inside a circle, with words written around the circumference that Jacob couldn't quite make out. He stepped closer, squinting at the writing. "As it was written. As it will be. As it. You shouldn't be here." Jacob spun around to find a man standing on the path behind him. He was in his 30s, tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes and the look of someone who hadn't slept in weeks. He wore a fishing jacket and boots, but there was something wrong about him. A wrongness that Jacob felt rather than saw. "I'm sorry," Jacob said, keeping his voice calm. "I'm the new pastor at the community church. Just exploring the area." "I know who you are." The man's voice was flat, emotionless. "Everyone knows. The question is, do you know what you are?" "I'm not sure I understand." "You will." The man took a step closer, and Jacob fought the urge to back up. Pastor Webb didn't understand either. Not at first. He thought he could save us. Thought prayer and faith would be enough. But you can't pray away what's already been written. "What's your name?" Jacob asked, trying to establish some connection, some normalcy. Names don't matter anymore. Not here. Not with the lighthouse awake. "The lighthouse is awake?" Jacob couldn't help the skeptical tone. "It's been dark for 17 years. The man smiled, and it was the most disturbing thing Jacob had seen since arriving in Sodom Hills. "Dark doesn't mean sleeping, Pastor. It just means waiting. Waiting for the right time. The right words." He gestured at the door behind Jacob. He knew. Samuel Thorne. He read the books, spoke the prayers, opened the way. And then he realized what he'd done. Too late, of course. It's always too late once the door is open. Jacob's rational mind screamed that this was just a disturbed individual, someone who needed medical help, not theological debate. But something deeper, more primal, recognized truth in the man's words. "What door?" Jacob asked quietly. "The one that should never be opened. The one that was sealed when they built this lighthouse. They thought they were building a beacon, a guide for ships. But beacons work both ways, Pastor. They call things in from the dark. And sometimes those things answer." Before Jacob could respond, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the overgrown path like he'd never been there at all. Jacob stood alone in front of the lighthouse, the wind whipping his hair, his heart pounding in his chest. He pulled out his phone to call someone, Margaret, the police, someone, but he had no signal. Of course not. The lighthouse blocked it somehow. He looked up at the dark tower, at the boarded windows and the painted warning on the door. And for just a moment, just the briefest second, he thought he saw a light in the top window. A flickering, pale light like candlelight. Then it was gone, and Jacob was running back down the path, his rational mind completely offline, his body operating on pure instinct. "Get away. Get away now. Don't look back." He didn't stop running until he reached the church, burst through the doors, and collapsed in the front pew, gasping for breath. That night, Jacob did something he hadn't done since seminary. He researched demonology. His laptop screen glowed in the darkness of his study, casting strange shadows on the walls. He'd locked every door and window in the parsonage, though he knew that was ridiculous. What was he afraid of? A weird conversation and his own overactive imagination? But he couldn't shake what the man had said. The lighthouse is awake. Jacob started with the basics, pulling up information about the lighthouse's construction in 1847. He found a digitized copy of the local newspaper from that year, the Sodom Hills Gazette. The article about the dedication ceremony was short. On this day, October 15, 1847, we celebrate the completion of the Sodom Hills Lighthouse, a beacon of hope and safety for mariners traveling our treacherous coast. Reverend Josiah Webb led the dedication ceremony, reminding us that as the lighthouse guides ships from darkness to safety, so too does Christ guide our souls from sin to salvation. May this light never be extinguished. Josiah Webb. That name again. Jacob dug deeper, searching for information about the Reverend. He found him mentioned in several historical documents. A fire and brimstone preacher who came to Sodom Hills in 1845 and immediately set about purifying the town. There were accounts of book burnings, accusations of witchcraft, and at least 3 executions for consorting with demons. The more Jacob read, the more uncomfortable he became. This wasn't the history of a Christian community. This was the history of zealotry and violence dressed up in religious language. He found a reference to Josiah Webb's personal journal housed in the Maine Historical Society archives. A quick search showed that someone had digitized portions of it. Jacob clicked on the link and a PDF opened. The entries were dated from 1845 to 1848. Jacob skimmed through them, noting the increasingly paranoid and apocalyptic tone. Then he found an entry from October 10, 1847, 5 days before the lighthouse dedication. "I have done what must be done. The seal is prepared," the words inscribed in the foundation. "When the light is lit, it will act as both beacon and barrier. What lurks in the deep places will be held at bay, unable to cross the threshold. But this protection comes at a price. The keeper must maintain the vigil. Should the light ever go dark, should the barrier fail, what was sealed will be unsealed. Thus it was written in the book of the damned, so shall it be. May God forgive me for what I have done. May He forgive us all." Jacob's hands were shaking. The Book of the Damned. He'd heard of it in seminary, a mythical grimoire supposedly containing rituals for summoning and binding demonic entities. Most scholars considered it fiction, a legend cobbled together from various occult traditions. But what if it wasn't? He kept reading. The next entry was dated October 16th, the day after the dedication. "It is done. The light burns, and I feel the darkness retreat. But I fear we have not vanquished it, only postponed its rising. The native shaman's dying curse echoes in my dreams. You have built your tower on bones and blood. When your light fails, the debt will come due, and it will be paid in souls. I pray daily that the light never fails. I pray that my descendants never learn what I have done." Jacob sat back in his chair, his mind racing. If this was real, if Josiah Webb had really performed some kind of binding ritual when the lighthouse was built, then what happened when Samuel Thorne let the light go out? He pulled up information about Samuel Thorne. 47 years old when he died, had been the lighthouse keeper for 12 years. Married with 2 children. By all accounts, a normal, stable man. Until the last few months of his life. Jacob found an interview with Thorne's widow from a few years after his death. Samuel was a good man, a God-fearing man. But something changed in him that last year. He started having nightmares, terrible nightmares. He said he heard voices in the lighthouse, calling to him from the rocks below. He said they knew his name, knew his children's names. He started reading his Bible constantly, desperately, like he was looking for something. And then one day, he told me he'd found it. "Thus it was written," he said. The answer was always there, in the scripture. I just had to know how to read it. He kissed me and the kids goodbye and went to the lighthouse. That was the last time I saw him alive." Jacob felt sick. He stood up and walked to the window. The lighthouse was invisible in the darkness, but he knew it was there. Watching. Waiting. His phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "Pastor Webb spent 3 months researching before it killed him. You've been here 4 days. You're running out of time. Meet me at the Catch Diner tomorrow at noon. Come alone. Don't tell the deacons." Jacob stared at the message. Every rational part of him said this was crazy, that he should call the police, that he was getting pulled into paranoid delusions. But a deeper part of him, the part that had felt the wrongness in the air since arriving, the part that had seen that flickering light in the lighthouse window, that part knew the truth. Something was very wrong in Sodom Hills. And he was running out of time to figure out what. The Catch Diner looked even more depressing in daylight. Faded red vinyl booths, yellowing linoleum floors, and a smell of old coffee and disappointment. Jacob arrived at 11:55, ordered a coffee he didn't want, and waited. At 12:07, a woman slid into the booth across from him. She was in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that had seen too much. She wore scrubs, a nurse, maybe, or hospital worker. "Dr. Rachel Hayes," she said quietly. "I'm the town physician. Also the coroner when needed." She glanced around the diner, which was mostly empty except for an old man at the counter. "You got my texts." "That was you. I need you to understand something, Pastor Mason. I'm a scientist. I believe in evidence, in rational explanation. But what's happening in this town?" She trailed off, shaking her head. "There's no rational explanation." "Tell me," Jacob said. Rachel pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. "These are the death certificates for the past 17 years. Since the lighthouse went dark." Jacob opened the folder. Inside were copies of maybe 30 death certificates. "Notice anything?" Rachel asked. He scanned through them. Heart attack, stroke, heart attack, sudden cardiac arrest. "They all died of heart-related issues," Jacob said slowly. "Now look at the ages. 23, 31, 19, 43, 27. All young, all supposedly healthy." "That's not normal," Jacob whispered. "It's statistically impossible. Sodom Hills has the highest rate of sudden cardiac death in New England. By a factor of 20. Rachel leaned forward, her voice urgent. "I've run every test I can think of. Environmental toxins, water quality, genetic factors. Nothing explains it, but they all have one thing in common." "What?" "They were all trying to leave town." The words hung in the air between them. "Every single one," Rachel continued. "They'd packed their bags, bought plane tickets, accepted job offers somewhere else. And then, within 24 hours of attempting to leave, their hearts just stopped." Jacob felt cold all over. "That's impossible." "I know, but it's happening. And it's getting worse." Pastor Webb figured it out. That's why he was researching the lighthouse. He found something in old church records, something about the original dedication ceremony. He showed me 2 weeks before he died. We were going to go public, contact the state police, get federal authorities involved. And then, he died of a heart attack. They said. Rachel's hands clenched into fists on the table. "But I saw his body, Jacob. I saw his face. People dying of heart attacks don't look like that. They look peaceful or at worst surprised." Pastor Webb looked like he'd seen hell itself. "Tell me what he found." Rachel pulled out another document, photocopies of handwritten pages. Jacob recognized the handwriting from the journal excerpts he'd read online. Josiah Webb. Pastor Webb, found these hidden in a false wall in the church office. They're from Josiah's personal notes, never meant to be seen by anyone. She pointed to a passage near the bottom of one page. "Read this." Jacob read. "The binding requires 3 elements, a vessel, the lighthouse, a keeper, the watchman who maintains the vigil, and a sacrifice, the souls who will pay the price should the vigil fail. I have provided the first 2. The third, God forgive me, but the third is the town itself. Every soul in Sodom Hills, bound to this place, unable to leave, serving as collateral for the darkness we have sealed away. It is a terrible price, but necessary. Better that a few suffer than the whole world fall to what lurks beneath. Jacob's coffee cup slipped from his numb fingers, coffee spreading across the table like blood. Rachel didn't seem to notice. "We're trapped," she said simply. "Everyone born in this town, everyone who's lived here long enough. We're bound to this place by whatever ritual Josiah Webb performed. And the only thing keeping us alive is that the darkness is still sealed." "But the lighthouse is dark," Jacob protested. "The seal should be broken." That's what Samuel Thorne discovered. When he let the light go out, he thought he was freeing us. But he was wrong. The light wasn't the seal, it was a warning. As long as it burned, the darkness stayed quiet. But now, Rachel's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Now it's waking up. And when it fully awakens, when it breaks through completely, everyone in this town dies. That's the price Josiah Webb promised. That's what "as it was written" means. It was written into the foundation of the lighthouse. A contract in blood and stone. Jacob's mind was reeling. Why tell me this? What am I supposed to do? Pastor Webb thought there might be a way to break the binding. Reverse the ritual. He was close, I know he was. But he ran out of time. Rachel reached across the table and grabbed his hand, her grip desperate. "You're a man of God, Jacob. Maybe that matters. Maybe you can find what he couldn't. Because if you don't, we're all going to die. And not peacefully. Not in our sleep. We're going to die the way Samuel Thorne died, terrified, souls torn apart, dragged down to whatever hell Josiah Webb made a deal with." Before Jacob could respond, the diner door opened. Margaret stepped inside, her eyes immediately finding them. Her expression went from concern to anger in an instant. "Dr. Hayes," she said coldly, "I thought we discussed this." Rachel stood up quickly, gathering her papers. "He deserves to know, Margaret. He has a right. He has a right to serve his congregation without being poisoned by your paranoid delusions." Margaret's voice was steel. "Pastor Mason, I apologize. Dr. Hayes has been under a great deal of stress. She's been spreading these theories and causing unnecessary panic." "Unnecessary?" Rachel laughed bitterly. 30 deaths, Margaret. 30 young people dead for no medical reason. But sure, let's call it unnecessary panic. That's enough. Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. "Leave. Before I call the sheriff." Rachel looked at Jacob one last time. "The answers are in the lighthouse, Pastor. Everything you need to know is there. But be careful. It doesn't want you to know. It doesn't want anyone to break the binding." She pushed past Margaret and out the door, leaving Jacob alone with the deacon. Margaret slid into the booth, her anger fading into something that looked almost like pity. "I'm sorry you had to hear all that. Rachel is a brilliant doctor, but she's been unwell since her son tried to leave town 5 years ago." "What happened to him?" Jacob asked quietly. Margaret's expression closed off. "He died. Heart attack. Tragic. And Rachel has never recovered. She's convinced there's some grand conspiracy, some supernatural explanation. But sometimes, Pastor, people just die. Even young people. Even good people. It's the way of the world." "Is it?" Jacob met her eyes. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like a pretty specific pattern." "You've been here 4 days, Margaret said, her voice hardening again. "You don't know this town. You don't know its history, its people. And you certainly don't know enough to start entertaining the ravings of a grief-stricken woman." Jacob wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers. But something in Margaret's expression stopped him, a desperation beneath the anger, a fear that ran bone deep. "What are you afraid of, Margaret?" he asked softly. She stood up abruptly. "I'm afraid of losing another pastor, Jacob. Thomas was my friend. I watched him spiral, watched him become consumed with these same questions Rachel is asking. And it killed him. I won't watch it happen again." She walked out, leaving Jacob alone in the diner with his cold coffee and a folder full of impossible deaths. The old man at the counter turned to look at him. Jacob realized with a start that it was the same man from the lighthouse path. "You're still here," the man said. It wasn't a question. Should I not be? The man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. We're all still here, Pastor. That's the problem. We can't leave. Can't die peacefully. Can't do anything but wait for the darkness to come and collect what it's owed. He stood up, dropped a few bills on the counter. But you're different. You weren't born here. The binding doesn't hold you. You can still leave. Then why am I here? Jacob asked. The man paused at the door. Maybe because God has a sick sense of humor. Or maybe because he thinks you can fix this. Either way, you better decide fast, Pastor. The lighthouse has been dark for 17 years. But it won't stay that way much longer. And when the light comes back on. He smiled that disturbing smile again. Thus it was written, so shall it be. He walked out, leaving Jacob alone with questions that had no rational answers and a growing certainty that he was in way over his head. Jacob spent the rest of the day in his office, poring over church records. If Josiah Webb had hidden documents in the walls, maybe there were more. Maybe there were answers. He found nothing. By nightfall, he was exhausted and frustrated. He'd pulled apart half the office, tapped on walls, checked under floorboards. Nothing but dust and old bulletins and hymnals that smelled like mildew. He was about to give up when his phone buzzed. Another text from Rachel Hayes. Check the basement. Thomas found something there in his last week. He wouldn't tell me what. Said it was too dangerous. Said he needed to be sure before sharing it. He never got the chance. The church had a basement. Jacob had seen the door, old, heavy, locked with a padlock that Margaret said had rusted shut years ago. She told him they just used it for storage anyway, nothing important. But if Pastor Webb had been down there? Jacob grabbed a flashlight from his desk and headed to the basement door. The padlock was indeed rusted, but when he examined it more closely, he noticed something. The rust was only on the outside. The mechanism itself moved smoothly when he tried it. Someone had been using this door recently. The lock had no key, but Jacob was from Maine. He knew how to deal with old padlocks. 5 minutes with a screwdriver and some force, and it popped open. The door swung inward with a groan, revealing stairs descending into darkness. The smell that wafted up was worse than the one in the church, decay and something chemical, like old books or preserved specimens. Jacob descended slowly, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The basement was larger than he'd expected, stretching the full length of the church. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, full of old decorations and equipment. A furnace hulked in one corner, silent and cold. And in the far corner, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A workspace. A desk covered with papers, books, candles burned down to nubs. And on the wall above it, someone had drawn a map. Not a geographic map, a spiritual one. Lines and circles and symbols that Jacob recognized from his demonology research, interconnected in ways that made his head hurt to look at. At the center of the map was the lighthouse. Jacob approached the desk, his hands shaking. The papers were covered with Thomas Webb's handwriting, increasingly erratic, increasingly desperate. Journal entries, prayers, translations of what looked like Latin or maybe older languages. One page caught his eye. October 1st, I understand now. The lighthouse isn't just a prison. It's a doorway. Josiah Webb didn't seal the darkness away. He invited it in, gave it anchor in our world. The light was meant to control it, to keep it dormant. But now the light is gone, and the darkness is waking. It's been feeding on us slowly, taking souls one by one. But when it's fully awake, when it has enough strength, God help us all. Another page. October 8th, I found the ritual. Hidden in the margins of the church Bible, written in a code only someone with seminary training would recognize. It's a reversal. A way to undo what Josiah did. But the cost is too high. It requires a sacrifice. A willing soul to take the place of the darkness, to seal the door from the inside. Essentially, damnation. Eternal imprisonment in that lighthouse, holding the door closed forever. I don't know if I have the strength. I don't know if I have the right to ask God to damn my soul to save this town. The last entry was dated October 14th, the day before Thomas Webb died. I'm going to try. Tonight. I have the words, I have the ritual. I know what needs to be done. If I succeed, this will all be over. If I fail, forgive me, Margaret. Forgive me, everyone. I did my best. Jacob stared at the page, his mind racing. Thomas had attempted the reversal ritual, and it had killed him. But what? What had gone wrong? He started going through the books on the desk, looking for clues. Most were in Latin or Greek, theological texts about demonology and spiritual warfare. But one book was different, older, its pages yellow with age, its cover unmarked. Jacob opened it carefully. Inside, handwritten in faded ink, was a title. The Book of the Damned. It was real. The Book of the Damned was real. His hands shook as he turned pages. The text was a mix of languages, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and others he didn't recognize. Diagrams showed circles and symbols, instructions for summoning and binding. And there, near the end, he found what Josiah Webb had used. The Binding of Sodom, a ritual to seal darkness and protect the righteous. Jacob read through it, his horror growing with each line. It was exactly what Rachel had described. A ritual that bound the souls of a town to a specific location, using them as collateral to keep a demonic entity contained. The entity wasn't specific, just described as what lurks beneath the waves, what whispers in the deep places, what hungered before man was made. But there was more. A section Josiah had marked with multiple annotations. The binding is eternal, but can be broken through counter-ritual. The requirements: one pure soul willingly given. Words spoken in the chamber of binding. Blood spilled on the threshold. As it was written, so must it be unwritten. As it was sealed, so must it be unsealed. But know this, the price of breaking is greater than the price of making. The volunteer walks willingly into damnation, becoming the new seal, holding the darkness at bay until the end of days. This is the cost of freedom. Jacob's legs gave out. He sank to the floor, the book clutched in his hands. Thomas Webb had tried to perform this ritual, had tried to sacrifice himself to free the town. And it had killed him. But he forced himself to keep reading, searching for the answer. And there, in the margins in Josiah Webb's handwriting, he found it. The volunteer must be without sin, must be pure in heart and deed. Otherwise, the darkness will consume them before the binding is complete, and all will be lost. Thomas Webb had tried. But he hadn't been pure enough. None of them were. None of them could be. Jacob's phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. Where are you? I know you're not at the parsonage. Please, Jake, don't do what Thomas did. Don't go to the lighthouse. He looked up at the map on the wall, at the lighthouse at its center. All the lines led there. All the answers were there. He needed to see it for himself. Needed to understand what he was dealing with before he made any decisions. Jacob stood up, pocketed the Book of the Damned, and headed for the basement stairs. As he climbed, his flashlight flickered. Twice. Then went out completely. In the darkness, he heard something. A whisper. Not words exactly, but something that felt like words, like language from before language was made. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from the walls and floor and ceiling. And it knew his name. Jacob ran. The lighthouse looked different at night. More solid somehow. More real. Like it had been waiting for him, and now that he was here, it could drop the pretense of being just an old building. Jacob stood at the base of the tower, the Book of the Damned clutched in his hand, and felt the wrongness radiating from the stones. It was physical, this wrongness. Like standing too close to a microwave or holding a phone too long. A sensation of being watched by something that didn't have eyes. The door with its painted warning was still chained shut. But the chains looked older now, more rusted. Like time moved differently here. Jacob pulled out his pocketknife and started working on the padlock. It took longer than the one at the church, but eventually, it gave way with a snap that sounded too loud in the night air. The chains fell away. The door swung open on its own, revealing darkness deeper than the night around him. Jacob should have turned back. Should have called the police, called his bishop, called someone who could handle this better than a small-town pastor with 4 days of experience in Sodom Hills. But he didn't. Because somewhere in his gut, he knew. He knew that Rachel was right, that Thomas had been right. And he knew that time was running out. He stepped into the lighthouse. The smell hit him first, salt and decay and something metallic like old blood. His flashlight flickered back to life, its beam cutting through the darkness. The interior was circular, maybe 15 feet across, with stairs spiraling up around the outer wall. The floor was stone, marked with symbols that Jacob recognized from the Book of the Damned. At the center of the floor was a circle, the binding circle. And around its circumference, written in what looked like dried blood, were words in Latin. As it was written, so shall it be. As darkness was bound, so shall darkness be free. When the light dies, the debt comes due. Payment in souls, forever and true. Jacob felt sick. This was it. The binding Josiah Webb had created. The curse that had held Sodom Hills for nearly 2 centuries. He started up the stairs, his flashlight beam dancing across the walls. Every few steps, he found more writing, Bible verses, twisted and corrupted. Prayers that had been inverted, turned into something dark and wrong. Blessed are the damned, for they shall inherit the deep places. The Lord is my darkness, I shall not want. Though I walk through the valley of light, I will fear no good. It went on and on, spiraling up the tower, each verse more disturbing than the last. Jacob's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the flashlight. At the top of the stairs was another door. This one was covered in paper, hundreds, maybe thousands of pages nailed to the wood. Jacob recognized them immediately, Bible pages. Every single page torn out and nailed up, just like Margaret had described Samuel Thorne doing before his death. And on every single page, written in desperate, frantic handwriting. As it was written. As it was written. As it was written. Jacob pushed the door open. The lighthouse chamber was exactly as he'd imagined it, circular, maybe 20 feet across, with windows looking out over the ocean. The lamp mechanism sat dormant in the center, its mirrors dark and still. But that's not what made Jacob stop breathing. Standing by the window, silhouetted against the night sky, was a figure. Not Samuel Thorne. Not Thomas Webb. Josiah Webb himself. Or something wearing his face. You came, the figure said, and its voice was wrong, too many voices speaking at once, layered and discordant. I knew you would. They always do. The pure ones. The believers. They can't help themselves. You're not Josiah Webb, Jacob managed to say. The figure turned, and in the dim light, Jacob could see that it was wearing period clothing from the 1840s. But the face was wrong. Too smooth, too perfect, like a mask of skin stretched over something that wasn't quite human. I am and am not, it said. I am what Josiah became when he made his bargain. I am what waits beneath. I am what was promised. It smiled, and its teeth were too white, too many. I am the darkness your kind feared in the deep waters. The hunger in the black places. The price for safety, for shelter, for survival. The binding ritual, Jacob whispered. Yes. The binding. Josiah thought he was protecting his flock. Thought he was sealing me away, using the souls of Sodom Hills as collateral. But he didn't seal me, he invited me in. Gave me anchor. Gave me power over every soul in this town. The thing wearing Josiah's face laughed. And now the light is gone. The barrier failed. I'm almost free. Just a few more souls, a few more years, and I'll have enough strength to break through completely. And then, it spread its arms wide. Then the whole world will be my Sodom Hills. Jacob's mind was racing. He had the Book of the Damned. He knew the reversal ritual. But Thomas had tried and failed. And if someone as pure-hearted as Thomas Webb couldn't break the binding, how could he? You're wondering if you can stop me, the thing said, reading his thoughts. You're wondering if you're pure enough, good enough, holy enough to perform the reversal ritual. To sacrifice yourself and seal me away forever. It took a step closer, and Jacob fought the urge to run. Let me tell you something, Pastor Mason. There is no one pure enough. No one sinless. No one worthy. That's the genius of Josiah's design. The reversal requires perfection, and perfection doesn't exist. Every soul who tries is consumed, adding their strength to mine. Thomas Webb thought he could do it. He was wrong. He died screaming, his soul torn apart, his essence feeding me. And you will too, if you're foolish enough to try. Then the town is damned, Jacob said quietly. The town was always damned. From the moment Josiah slaughtered the natives and built this lighthouse on their bones, Sodom Hills was marked for destruction. I'm just collecting what's owed. The thing tilted its head, studying him. But you're different, aren't you? You weren't born here. The binding doesn't hold you. You can leave. You can walk away. Go back to your comfortable church somewhere else and forget this place exists. Let me have my due and save yourself. It was the smart choice. The rational choice. Jacob was one man against something he didn't fully understand, armed with nothing but faith and a book of dark rituals. What could he possibly do? He thought of Rachel Hayes, trapped in this town, unable to leave, watching her son die. He thought of Margaret, her fear and desperation. He thought of all the people in Sodom Hills, bound by a curse they didn't create, paying for sins they didn't commit. He thought of Thomas Webb, who had tried and failed but had tried anyway. No, Jacob said. The thing's smile faded. No. I'm not leaving. I'm not letting you have these people. I'm going to perform the reversal ritual, and I'm going to seal you away. Permanently. The thing laughed, a sound like breaking bottles and screaming children. You'll die, Jacob Mason. Your soul will be torn apart. You'll spend eternity in torment, holding a door closed against something you can't even comprehend. That's what you're volunteering for. Endless, eternal damnation. Maybe, Jacob said, pulling out the Book of the Damned. But at least I'll die trying to save people instead of trying to save myself. That has to count for something. He started reading the reversal ritual, his voice shaking but steady. The words were in Latin, ancient and heavy with power. As he spoke, the lighthouse began to shake. The lamp mechanism in the center of the room sparked to life, light blazing out across the ocean for the first time in 17 years. The thing wearing Josiah's face screamed. It rushed at Jacob, its form shifting and changing. No longer human, no longer pretending to be. It was darkness given shape, hunger with teeth, ancient and terrible. Jacob kept reading. The ritual required blood. Jacob pulled out his pocket knife and cut his palm, letting his blood drip onto the floor, onto the symbols carved there. The blood sizzled where it landed, smoke rising, and the thing screamed again. The words came faster now, the ritual building to its climax. Jacob could feel it pulling at him, at his soul, demanding the sacrifice. Demanding that he give himself completely, that he walk willingly into damnation to seal this door. And in that moment, as the ritual reached its peak, Jacob understood what Thomas Webb had discovered. Why he'd failed. It wasn't about being sinless. It wasn't about being pure. It was about being willing. It was about choosing freely and completely to sacrifice yourself for others. Not because you were good enough, but because they were worth it. It was about grace. I offer myself, Jacob said, the final words of the ritual. Not because I'm worthy, but because they are. Take me. Seal the door. Let these people go. Light exploded from the lamp, so bright it burned his eyes. The thing screamed and screamed and screamed. And then, Jacob was falling. Not physically, but spiritually. Falling through layers of reality, through the thin places between worlds. He could feel the darkness reaching for him, trying to tear him apart like it had done to Thomas. But something else reached for him too. Something warm and bright and impossibly gentle. He heard a voice, not words, but something deeper than words. A presence that felt like home and safety and love beyond understanding. Well done, good and faithful servant. You are not damned. You are saved. And you will hold the door. But not alone. Never alone. And Jacob understood. The sacrifice wasn't damnation. It was service. Eternal service, yes, but service alongside the divine, holding back the darkness not as punishment but as calling. He would be the new seal, the new keeper, but he would do it wrapped in grace, sustained by something greater than himself. The falling stopped. Jacob found himself standing in the lighthouse chamber, but it was different now. Right. The darkness was still there. He could feel it pressing against the door, but it couldn't cross the threshold. Not anymore. He was the threshold. He looked down at his hands. He could see through them, could see the stone floor beneath. He was no longer quite physical, no longer quite alive. But he wasn't dead either. He was something between, something new. The lighthouse lamp burned steady and true, its light piercing the darkness. Jacob understood that it would burn forever now. That he would maintain it. That this was his place, his purpose, until the end of all. He heard voices below. Shouting. Footsteps on the stairs. Margaret burst into the chamber, followed by Rachel and several others. They stopped short, seeing the light, seeing Jacob's translucent form. "Jacob," Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her face. "What have you done?" "What needed to be done," Jacob said, and his voice echoed strangely, like it was coming from far away. "The binding is broken. You're free. All of you. You can leave Sodom Hills now. The darkness can't touch you anymore." Rachel stepped forward, her hand outstretched like she wanted to touch him but couldn't quite reach. "And you?" "I'm the new seal. I'm holding the door. But I'm not suffering, Rachel. I'm not damned. He struggled to find the words. "I'm serving. And I'm not alone." He could feel it, the presence that had caught him when he fell. It was still there, would always be there. Grace made manifest, holding him up, giving him strength. "The town is free," he said again. "But be happy. That's all I want." Margaret was sobbing openly now. "We can't just leave you here." "You can. You have to. This is my calling now. My purpose." Jacob smiled, and felt it echo across multiple planes of existence. "Tell people what happened here. Tell them that grace is real, that sacrifice means something, that sometimes God asks us to do hard things but He never asks us to do them alone." One by one, they filed out, looking back at him with expressions of grief and wonder and fear. Rachel was the last to leave. She paused at the door. "Thank you," she said simply. "You're welcome," Jacob replied. She left, and Jacob was alone in the lighthouse chamber. But not truly alone. Never truly alone. He walked to the window and looked out over Sodom Hills. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He could see people emerging from their homes, could feel the binding releasing them. Freedom spreading through the town like light through darkness. They would leave, most of them. Would pack up their lives and go somewhere not cursed by the past. Somewhere they could breathe freely, live without fear. And that was good. That was right. The lighthouse lamp turned, its beams sweeping across the ocean. Jacob turned with it, his form merging with the light, becoming part of it. He was the keeper now. The watchman. Standing guard between darkness and light, holding the door closed against what hungered beneath. And he would stand there until the end of days, wrapped in grace, sustained by love, serving as he had always wanted to serve. Not damned. Saved. The light kept turning. The darkness kept pressing. And Jacob Mason kept watch. Forever.